Public Space Travel is a leftist, anti-capitalist podcast of disgruntled academics, video gamers, and friends. Our belief is that knowledge should be made more accessible and be used for anti-oppression and non-hierarchical revolutionary ends. You can support what we do at patreon.com/public space travel and reach out to us at publicspacetravel@gmail.com or leave us a voicemail at 208-502-1406. Now, on to the show.
Public space travel. Public space travel. And so on and so on.
I can't help but believe that in the future we'll see throughout the world an increasing trend toward the next logical step. We'll achieve full communism.
Public space travel. Public space travel. And so on and so on.
Welcome to Public Space Travel. I am Lazarus Wolf.
Is that a question? Are you not sure who you are?
Welcome.
Public Space Travel?
Lazarus Wolf, am I?
With me today is Hunty.
Hey.
Lichen.
Hi.
Our shadow producer, Marks.
Hello.
And Luci.
Hi.
We are recording this episode on Sunday, May 31st, 2020, and by the time you listen to this episode, things will most likely have changed. So keep that in mind while we're discussing this. Now, originally, our episode for today was going to be about Michael Moore's Planet of the Humans documentary, which we'll do in the future. But I think it's a little bit more pertinent that we talk about what's going on currently and really what's been going on systemically for... throwing my hands up.
Day one of
July 4th, 1776.
Yeah.
And before that, though, too.
Yeah. But that was a monumental date.
Well, for the United States.
Yep. Which is the
Yeah.
center of all.
True.
Mm-hmm.
I guess we don't have time to talk about the British, French.
Yeah, or that
generally.
or that one guy who started the fake science about why people of color scientifically are different. I can't remember the name of it.
Like the eugenics people?
Yeah, like the guy that just like by himself like inspired other people. I don't have
Scientific racism.
Scientific racism. That's what
Bullshit.
it was. Yeah, the guy who started that.
Yeah, so we'll kind of condense all that into what's going on today.
Yeah, we're gonna start with slave labor in Egypt. And
There is no
go all the way.
beginning.
Yeah.
Well, back in Moses' time, you see.
You said in Moses' time. Who's that?
Who's Moses? I actually don't really know. I just know he's from the Bible. I don't really know the story.
Isn't he a wizard?
He's a.
I don't think there's
sure Moses is
wizardry
a
in the
wizard.
Bible.
There was.
Wizardry is not in the Bible, right?
He.
Unless it's like God granted.
Yeah.
Did Moses build the ark?
That was Noah.
I just remember
shit.
that. I just remember that scene from History of the World Part 1 where Moses comes down and he drops the third tablet and he's like, "There's 15. Oops, 10 commandments."
Is he the one who parted the Red River? Or Red Sea?
Or the Red Sea?
I think so.
Oh, and he
Yeah.
led people out of
That place.
Galilee?
The original D&D manual had a lot of sand wizards that were like really powerful.
You might be losing some listeners. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Let's do a whole episode on butchering the Bible. That sounds
Yep.
awesome.
I know a little
down.
bit.
I'm down.
I know just enough to get into a lot of trouble.
Yeah.
My poor Grammy right now. That woman did her best. She failed.
That woman did her best.
Wasn't good enough.
No, it was not. I was like, this all sounds like bullshit. Sorry, Grammy.
Yeah.
Oh, rest in peace.
Oh, rest in power, Grammy.
Yeah.
Well,
No.
No.
Let's talk about Karens. Let's talk about Karens. My Grammy chased Mormons away from our porch with a broom.
Really?
Yeah, for real. She was Southern Baptist. She took it real serious.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
Okay, moving on.
So around the country and really around the world are mass demonstrations, and largely in response to the killing, the public murder by the state, but by extension the police force of George Floyd. I
feel like
it's the world is on
a lot.
Fire.
It's overwhelming.
Yeah. It's overwhelming in the sense that this is happening.
It just happens. It's like,
yeah.
At what point does it end? It's like,
yes.
I feel powerless to do anything about it, and it's overwhelming. It's just systems of oppression are like that. I mean, there's so much built into a structure so that some people retain power while others are never given access to that.
There was a video I saw of a lady from I want to say Louisiana, and I feel like for some reason it's important also to point out that it was a white lady who was showing a timeline of this is how much time since America was founded that slavery was a thing, and then this is how much time that it was segregation, and then this is how much time, and I don't have the numbers off my head, but basically just showing that 75% of the time has been unequal. It's still unequal, but like 75% of the time has been like a very like state sanctioned, like an obvious state sanctioned racism in this country. Now it's like more hidden and it's like invisible, and it's not like the police specifically saying we don't want black people in our neighborhoods, but and she pointed out that so basically in all of this time in American history, black people have been working for free, and then for a short amount of time they were not technically slaves, but they also weren't allowed to even go in the same movie theaters and that kind of thing. And then now technically you aren't allowed to keep them out of the movie theaters, but now all of a sudden there's this
keeping them in the jails.
But now all of a sudden there's this mentality where they're like, well, how come they don't just, go get a job? Or like, how come, they can't, there's a lot of people who don't understand why there's still frustration, because through all those years of American history, white people have been able to build themselves up and accumulate wealth and have, provide structures for themselves and their families. Meanwhile, black people have barely been able to do that. Basically, I don't know, like 20 years or something like it feels like it's only like 20 years or so that there's been like a level of like an even playing field, even though that's not true, but somewhat close to it. And so to feel that, and then to have that, to have that even, it's like highlight even more in this moment because of COVID-19. Those same people who have to work those jobs that white people don't want to work, or like, too fancy to work. They're the ones that are most susceptible to contracting COVID because they work those quote unquote essential jobs and everything like that. And then they're also the ones who are losing their jobs because they usually work in like service industries and things like that, and restaurants closed and all these things. And we have 40 million people unemployed, and like a quarter of them maybe have gotten the $1,200 check, one-time stimulus check, and then they're also getting killed, like just willy-nilly. And so it's just like a lot. Like we've talked about before, how COVID-19 hasn't changed, like it hasn't introduced anything new to the issues that we all face, but it's just highlighted that. And this is kind of like a situation where we've all been stuck in our homes, and we're all tuned in now. Like, I think that's sort of like why the protests have kind of like erupted in the way they've been, is because like there's nowhere else to look. There's nothing else to distract you. There's no job. Like, these people don't have jobs anymore to distract them from the day-to-day struggle. So they're just like, all I can do is sit here at home and look at Twitter and see this bullshit.
Yeah. And I think to speak to that historic, basically you're talking about the systemic racism, that,
can we define that really quickly? I've been thinking about that a lot, actually, as we speak, because so many of us are from this sort of academic background where we take for granted that everybody understands what we're talking about. So do you want to break down what that means to you exactly when you say systemic racism? Like, what does that look like?
From my understanding, for systemic racism is a prolonged history of communities of color basically not having access and specifically limited to the resources, and therefore the continuation and perpetuation of inequity.
Yeah, I would say also like structures that have been built in effort to maintain a status quo wherein white humans are benefited to the detriment of people of color.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so those structures are sometimes things that we can't see, right? I mean, like, you can't always see a system of racism because it's so ingrained in our communities and our culture. But like, when you have a disproportionate number of people of color dying from COVID because they have no access to the kinds of health care that they have needed, not just during COVID, but for decades prior to this pandemic happening, that is systemic. Like, that is an absolutely excellent example. It's a horrible, excellent example of what systemic racism looks like. When you have decades of people unable to get health care and then struck down by a pandemic that is not slowed, when they talk about like what Luci was saying, we need to open the economy, they've lost their jobs, yada, yada. That is systemic. And that's something that we don't always see because it's happening so often and for so long.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's like the result of different historic like cultural, like, and economic events, like redlining, where, certain areas were designated for like whites only. You had like the suburban, like the white flight, and so forth. Like, these are the things that, like, at least for me, like, I didn't learn about until I hit up like, grad school, and it was like, whoa. But otherwise, like, for example, like just today, Trump's national security advisor, Robert O'Brien, went like on live news like interview and said that like, oh no, he denied that there was systemic racism that exists across the nation's police forces and so forth. And like, and then I was also thinking, Luci, when you're talking about just the disproportionate like ability of, because of systemic racism and other factors, of communities of color being able to or have access, right? I was thinking back on the Black Wall Street and the Tulsa race massacre, which happened May 30th, like on the Memorial Day, which Black Wall Street was a prosperous area of, doing very well, local Black business owners. And then because of a large group of white gun-toting dudes, they came in and basically burned down Wall Street. And I mean,
and I think a lot of like to acknowledge how this keeps happening, because we hear all these like social narratives of like good people and individual choices and I'm not racist, I don't see color. And I think the importance to recognize that all of that is perpetuating it. And that, like, I mean, I'm in the field of education primarily. I think it's important to recognize how education is entangled with politics and economics, et cetera, et cetera. But this like determination to be neutral and apolitical is so prevalent and common. And like, a lot of the students I teach who are going to become up and coming teachers for elementary school students, still they want to be not racist. They want to teach students equally. But I try to bring this up in my class, but there's not always a lot of anti-racism coming in. Like, just the idea is I don't want to be racist, which is great, but how can you be anti-racist? And Like, I want to teach my students about Black History Month. That's great. Let's also talk about Black Lives Matter. Like, there's still this way of how can we get at these issues without becoming political? You can't. And so this separation of politics from, I'd say, education particularly, is so effective at perpetuating like the inequities that are political and do exist.
Yeah.
Education is always political. It's an
Right.
attempt, but education is always political, and but that's another systemic issue, right? To not be able to call it what it is. Education is political. Period. Like, it's not even a question. Is education political? Yes,
Right.
it is.
And when you're saying no, that's a political statement.
Right.
But like everything is political, and I always want to go like, and the people who don't think everything's political are the people who are fucking fine, like their lives are fine. But that's also not true, because there are people who lives aren't fine who also will take that stance. But it's like the people who I found are in such a survival mode that they don't really have time to actually like when you're like, I have to basically not believe that everything's political just so I can get along with my boss so that I can still have a job to pay the bills this month. Like I feel like those are the two spectrums that will say or have the mentality of, we don't have to make this political kind of thing.
Right. Don't want to lose friendships, don't want to cause conflict. And when there's very real power relations and you could lose your job, like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there a way, I shared, I think on our chat, a document that has anti-racist resources on it, and so that's a really great sort of, I don't know if we can share that somewhere.
I've seen that circulating
Lazarus,
around, and it's
it's really good. But I mean, it's and I mean, and that I feel the same way about working with students who want to be teachers and I've worked with teachers who are trying to be teachers who don't know how to integrate things because there is that fear there. The teachers I've worked with work and live in predominantly white communities, and they don't know what to do. They just don't, and they don't know how to do it, and they don't know if they're allowed. Because it's political.
And the fear of parents. I was talking about this yesterday with my mom, she just resigned, but she taught for over 30 years, and I hear that often too. And I imagine I am also a new teacher, albeit at the college level, but this fear of parents that I don't think is always founded in some ways. I think a lot of it has to do with relationships and how you bring up issues and how you treat parents. But there is that fear going into the profession of, what am I going to get in trouble for?
Yeah.
And I want to have sympathy for that, like not knowing how to start, but that doesn't mean that we don't do the work.
There's been a lot on the kind of like left Twitter versus what's being portrayed and discussed in the mainstream news, like on television and so forth, like CNN, MSNBC. I admit I haven't been watching Fox, but I did hear their news anchor got heckled at. But I'm just really also curious about how I'm thinking like in a critical race theory sense. We talked about in a prior episode, we talked about interest convergence, where change doesn't happen unless it coincides with basically the interests of whiteness. And so I was thinking about how, like, on left activist Twitter, you see a lot of these videos of protesters, demonstrators being attacked by the police. These protesters being nonviolent, but you have police either attempting to, and we could probably link some of these videos, but like police cars like pushing and trying to run over nonviolent protesters, to just randomly throwing punches, shooting. There was another one of like shooting reporters.
That just happened in New York. Like an SUV ran through a group of protesters.
Yeah. And yet from what I've seen predominantly in mainstream media is that it's the protests have now turned to riots, which have turned to looters. Things are being set on fire. Think about the shops in your community, the small business, how can you be burning down your city? Like that line of rhetoric, but also really not in like without saying it, it's not being said. It's gaslighting the activist experience of being assaulted by the police.
So can I back us up just a little bit, because you were talking about critical race theory and interest convergence, and Luci talked about, like people don't have anything, they can't look away from anything. We've talked about this before, and I know we're going to talk about it in the future, but this idea of like how you get your information and what that information looks like. So like, where are you looking? Where can't you turn away from? And what information are you getting? Because you mentioned news sources, Lazarus, and you mentioned, the things that you've seen and the things that you've heard. I imagine that those stories are very different from information source to information source. So how do you ensure interest convergence among populations that are often getting their information from vastly different sources, and that information is then, like trickled down in interesting, sometimes dangerous ways, so that it's no longer a story about a struggle against power, and it's no longer a story about the value of Black lives, and it's no longer a story about police departments running amok and killing their citizens. It's then a story about stealing Legos from a Target. So how do you how do you ensure that those interests can, and we talked about this a little bit already, how do you make sure that those communities are built in a way that can affect change when this information is coming from these sources and it's hard to sometimes make sense of? Do you know what that's where I get really frustrated, because I know that some people are seeing stories that just completely disassociate the struggle that is real from, the violent things that are happening.
Right. And when you read that story, sometimes I really try to imagine, when you are exposed to Fox News every single day, and the story plays on these fears of people who are robbing a Target. What about the owners? And what does that say about morals? And it's I can totally see how it's convincing, but how do we?
Well, and the viewpoint, the point of view is going to be different from news source from news source. So maybe Fox News is saying these police have every right to protect themselves no matter what, because they're keeping the peace, right? They're peacekeepers. Anybody who's read The Hunger Games knows how that plays out. But anyway, we'll have to talk about that. But, and then you have these other, Rachel Maddow retweeting these people saying, no peace until, sorry, I don't know what this saying is.
Oh, no justice, no peace.
No justice, no peace. Yeah, thanks.
I feel like in my personal realm, I've taken to excommunicating from people who just don't, who either aren't willing or just unable to understand. And because I understand there's there's the danger of the echo chamber sort of thing, but I think at the same time, when people, it's kind of almost let's turn the tables, just make it harder for them to have jobs, just make it harder for them to support their families, and realize that when you don't understand, you aren't willing to understand, and you aren't willing to show solidarity and to show even just basic respect for human dignity, and actually acknowledge the pain that people are going through and acknowledge your own privilege and stuff like that. I feel there has to come a point where you say well, you're not really welcome in the society that we're trying to build. And if you are willing to talk and actually have a conversation and come to terms with what's really going on, and to take time to understand the real root of these issues, then of course we can always talk. We'd rather be friends than enemies. But at the same time, I'm kind of, I guess I'm taking more, it's I'm trying to also protect my mental health and not have these constant debates with people that I try not to generalize, but I think as I've gotten older, I appreciate my hours more. So I just don't like to spend too much time if I don't have to. with people that I don't feel like are going to even try to make an effort in good faith to have an argument about it.
Absolutely. I just wonder how we do that. Like it shocks me. Like I feel like the teachers that I've worked with are always well-meaning, but fear drives so much of what they do.
Yeah.
And these white folks just don't, and I don't know what lacks there. Is it education? Is it access to better information, which is thereby also education? Is it they're feeling so ineffective? Like I don't know. It's so hard for me to find a root cause for why people refuse to have those conversations that you're talking about, Luci. Like I get it. Like me too. I have no fucking time. I really don't. I'm like, ugh, nope. I understand you want to be my friend on Facebook. No, you cannot post that. That's stupid. Like you're dumb. Yeah. And I can't with you. Right.
Yeah. Even like today, like I'm thinking I saw my uncle's post, like super right wing, and it says, to anyone who's, I don't care what your political affiliation is, if you've been asking, why shouldn't I, or why do I need an AK-47? I think that's the gun. Just look at the news today. Tell me I'm wrong. I really wanted to tell him he was wrong, and I really wanted to comment and get into it. But at the same time, and I feel all these conflicting pulls of like, I don't want to, like, I want to be not a Karen, but like, I don't want to just be demure and not comment because I'm afraid of getting into conflict. But at the same time, I'm not going to change his mind. There's nothing I can say to him on Facebook that I don't think he's not going to listen. And I would rather put my energy, like you've been saying, like I'd rather mobilize people who are like, I want to learn more. I'm not really sure what action I could take, but I want to be learning about this. That to me just is so much more helpful than let me get into it with my gun-loving uncle. Like
Yeah. You know, I just had a thought that possibly one way to do it is to, you know, who is it? Gwyneth Paltrow? That's
yes.
So she's kind of like a symbol of Karens in a way. And like if there was a way to take that Karen energy and maybe like, you know, like sort of Jedi mind trick it where you go, all right, we're not saying it's bad to be Karen, but we're saying use your Karen powers for good.
Oh, like reclaim the Karen.
This was exactly my argument earlier. I think that all white women are Karens. It just depends on how you're going to use that energy.
Write that article.
You could complain. You could complain about how your guacamole came on top of your burrito instead of on the side of your burrito. Or you could be like, no, I want systemic change. You can call your representatives. You can actually go to your city council meetings. You can run for city council. And you can actually try to affect change in the most Karen way possible. You know, or not. I mean, you could do it differently. But I think that there are reasons for that. I think that as I was telling Lichen and Lazarus earlier, I think that white women come oftentimes from these mothers who maybe didn't feel like they were effectual or wanted to, you know, like raise strong, independent women. And then if you don't have the benefit of understanding intersectionality, interest convergence, if you don't have the benefit of understanding inequities, then sometimes that Karenness can be about the guacamole and not about, do you see what I'm saying? It's just like that happens. I mean, I hear so many, I ordered this. I wanted dressing on the side.
Yeah.
You know, that Meg Ryan moment in When Harry Met Sally, where it's like, what happens if it comes out incorrect? We never saw that part of Meg Ryan, but I feel like she's probably a Karen.
Yeah.
In that moment.
I really like that.
I do think though that there are some white folk who maybe they'll say or like understand, I'm doing like air quotes here, of systemic racism, but like for their own self-interest from a very hyper individualist point of view, they'll say like, yeah, but either I don't have the time or like, you know, it's any kind of excuse because it threatens their privilege.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah, that reminds me of something that I was thinking of last night while I was out there like looking at the police, like who were just standing there holding the line for whatever reason. I was like, what are they even protecting behind them? It's just an empty street. But I was like, at the very least, what I would accept is a sense of selfishness on the part of police officers to, even if they said, you know what? I want justice for George Floyd because I am tired of working overtime. This has, like, if they were just so selfish where they were just like, I just want to go home now, please, can we just, they just, cross the line because they were self-interested in and just wanted to go home and play their video games. I would accept that, to be honest. I would accept that because at least that would be a change. And I think that's the whole point of like looting and burning, is because the idea is saying your businesses are not profitable when racism exists. This isn't, like, people need to understand that this is not something that can continue to go on, and you expect you to live a happy, healthy life. Like, these inequalities cannot continue to go on, and you just expect that your shit is going to be okay. Like, you're going to be negatively affected by this until we are all equal. And
my only fear is, do you think that I wouldn't want it to become racial equity for capitalism? Like, but do you think it,
Yes.
I don't think they can necessarily coexist, to be quite honest, but like, do you think that would come out? Like, if we, be selfish to support the cause, do you think that would naturally become about something more? Like, I don't know. Because I feel like it's tempting to say, like, no matter why you're supporting it, like, sure, like, support it.
I mean, it's kind of a slippery slope, I think, but
yeah.
Sorry, I didn't mean to.
No, I'm still processing.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I have a hard time calling killing of Black and brown people inequity or inequality. I have a really hard time conflating those two things, because inequality might be more that sort of marketplace idea of capitalism. Like, we don't all have the same things or whatever. And I feel like this is state-sanctioned murder, and I don't know that that's inequality. I think that that's just blatant racism. And so I don't want things to be fair. I don't want things to be equal. I want things to be right. And this isn't fucking right. Yes. Do you know what I keep hearing inequality, and I'm like, that's not what this is. Like,
Yeah, I think, like, because, like, in my mind, it's like there's so much of this overlap for all the things. Yeah. It's actually really hard for me to know the labels, to be honest. Like, what should I be calling this? Because it is obviously murder. It is obviously like a state-sanctioned lynching, modern-day lynching.
Yes.
But it's also connected to other stuff as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I just don't want to call what happens to people like Trayvon and George, and I don't want that to be about inequality. I want people to call it murder. Like, that's what it is. People need to be tried by a system that's broken already. Perfect. Yeah. Fuck.
When you murder in the name of racism, your businesses will not prosper.
Yeah.
But then isn't that?
I think.
But is that?
It's I guess like, because it is like a capitalist take, but it's also like, let me speak your language for a minute.
Yeah, I get that.
To just get them to stop fucking killing people. Like,
yeah, like I guess I'm trying to be like, let me find a middle ground here. If I have to, I don't want to. I really don't.
I think one thing too is that for the people who are like really concerned about, like, oh, why would you burn down that Vons, that Safeway, that Walmart, that's you're burning down your community. I think I would say, like, that's like, these corporate chains are not your community.
Right.
These are capitalist entities that are exploiting labor and continuing a system that values greed and hierarchy and oppression and helps perpetuate it with economic violence, let alone other forms of violence. And that, I'll just leave it there. Take what you want from that, but you know what I mean?
You sound like a socialist.
Snap. I was going to say, everybody can definitely get behind burning down an Arby's, though.
Yeah.
We've got the meat.
There's
they don't.
There's a really great tweet that I just always, it's in my mind every morning almost, where it's like, Timothy Target and Stephen AutoZone are so distraught right now.
I have a question about, so for interest convergence, so I've heard people talk about critical race theory in like different ways. Would you say interest convergence with whiteness or white people? Because I think there's a big difference there. And as we're thinking about how to maybe use that strategically, what is the interest that can best spur change? Like, is it to mobilize white humans, or is it to figure out how to disrupt whiteness as a like at where are we?
Maybe both.
What's the differentiation there? I guess.
Maybe a little of both in the sense. So like I used interest convergence earlier, and you're right. Like I didn't clarify. Like what I was trying to get at was like, corporate media and mainstream media will portray a certain picture because it's to their own interests, as opposed to like local activist experiences and so forth. But I think maybe to answer your question, like I'll probably be wrong, but like it's probably what we need to do is not only mobilize white people, but also we're mobilizing against whiteness. Right. Is that kind of what you were asking?
Yeah,
I don't know.
I think, or maybe actually, if listeners haven't heard the critical race theory one, maybe can we just talk a little bit more about what interest convergence, like what do we mean by that? I'll let you talk about it.
I think I could use a refresher as well.
Yeah, give me 1 second.
Yeah, go for it.
Notes and this could be cut out. I'll let Hunty, you're more than welcome to.
Well, I think that, whiteness is the power structure, right? And so when you talk about whiteness, it would be difficult. Oh, shit. So I would say that whiteness is by and large tied to structures of capital. And so I think that the purpose of whiteness is to ensure that other humans don't have access to that. And so I don't think that it's possible to converge with whiteness if you're a person of color. So I think that in terms of like an idea, it would be very difficult to, well, it maybe isn't to folks' benefit to converge with whiteness, because it is a structure inherent in the systemic sort of displacement of people, rather than sort of like gathering them together as like a community. And again, that's oftentimes tied to capital. And so I think that when we talk about interest convergence, the problem oftentimes, backing up a little bit, the problem oftentimes is that you have these humans who are reliant on this idea of whiteness. So if you talk about capital and you talk about class, you oftentimes have white humans who are from a lower socioeconomic class who are desperate to buy into this idea of whiteness because that offers them ability and mobility. Does that make sense? And so the idea would be that the interest convergence then would be what elements of their lives speak to the struggles of other humans as well, so that they are then separated from this idea of whiteness and buy in more to this idea of these other struggles that other humans sort of have to process through on a daily basis because of the systemic problems with whiteness. Does that make sense? It's sort of circular and has a lot to do with class and capital and money always, and, power structures. How'd I do?
I think that's pretty good. Like I had understood interest convergence of things don't change unless it converges with whiteness, the interest of whiteness and the defense of whiteness.
But doesn't that, and we're pushing against that, like as change must happen against whiteness.
Yeah, because I think if you are against oppression, if you're against capitalism, you're not seeking to like, we're going to get everybody in on this giant whiteness boat. We got to get them all in. We can all be on the whiteness train. Like that doesn't, I think that's not what we're looking for. We're looking for something that is anti-oppression, anti-hierarchy, anti-capitalism. And whiteness as property embodies those things. It's manifested in these systemic institutional structures that perpetuate capitalism, perpetuate hierarchy, oppression, exploitation, and so forth. We don't want that. So
this is from, a theory to better understand diversity. What is interest convergence? Stipulates that Black people achieve civil rights victories only when white and Black interests converge. I would say people of color. I would like broaden that a little bit. This was, a while ago that this whole idea of interest convergence sort of came into this sort of mainstream academic conversation anyway. And so that's what I'm talking about. Like you have to find interests within communities that are, especially for white folks, if you want to mobilize white folks, it has to be around interests that I would say push against this idea of whiteness and what whiteness requires.
And that's what
I do think.
go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, just real quick, that I do think, though, that it emphasizes that change only happens, or largely happens when the interests of whiteness converge.
I would say it's the interests of white people and not of whiteness. I would say that whiteness is the power structure. And so I think that that is systemic. I think that whiteness is systemic, and that white people's interests versus whiteness as the goal. Does that make sense?
That's kind of what I was thinking.
So, yeah, because I was looking at, I think that's right. Because I'm looking here at Bell, and saying that the notion that civil rights advances for people of color coincide with the self-interest of white elites. So.
Right. And that's where I think this idea of selfishness can kind of be played with, because this like story that we tell of altruism and saviorism is so connected to conquer, because when like the white savior goes in saying, oh, I will go in and save everyone, that's still whiteness. And so maybe in some ways this selfishness or interest, seeing how your interests are wrapped up in that, isn't always a bad thing if it's in a certain way. Like I always go back to Fred Moten and Stefano Harney talk about Black oppression, specifically in education, but I don't want your help. They're like speaking to the white savior. I want you to realize that this shit is killing you too, however much more softly. And so, like, no, it's not killing in just ways, but you're just as wrapped up in it as everyone else. Not the same way, but like to recognize that promoting racial justice or against cultural genocide for indigenous peoples, like all of these things aren't just a savior move. They're also like a move for better relationships as all humans.
I worry a little bit. Sorry, I know I push back about some of this stuff every once in a while, but I feel like it's a time of radical change. I feel like it's necessary. I feel like radical change is necessary, and I don't know that selfishness plays a part in that. I feel like that's what whiteness allows us to do. Whiteness allows us to be selfish because aside of interest convergence, selfishness allows us to change a fact of the world that is killing other folks, and to be able to step back from that and say it's about me when it probably shouldn't be. Like it shouldn't be about, like, do you kind of see what I'm saying?
Yeah. Is there a way to not to be a savior or selfish? Like, what is that called when you're in solidarity, not just trying to isolate yourself from it, but not trying to make it all about you? Like, what is that?
I think anti-racism is that. I think that's what that is.
There's a physical example that I've seen where a group of white people went on the front lines to protect the Black protesters.
I saw that.
Like yesterday or the day before.
Day before, I think.
I don't remember where it's from, but I feel like that's a pretty good physical example of that.
Putting your white bodies at the very front.
And it's not a
between you and
martyr move. It's a compassionate, like.
It's like
I think it's what's needed. Yeah.
It's helpful when like, so for example, like I was at a protest last night, and it's, I mean, I don't know, maybe this is problematic, but it feels so much better when you know that there are white people there with you, like for a number of reasons. One, I guess because you feel safer, because you know maybe you're less likely to be arrested because you're next to a white person, but also because you don't feel like you're just by yourself.
Yeah.
And like you don't feel like nobody cares. And I think that, because I think there's a way to do it. I think there's like, if it's like, I've seen a lot of examples of like a lot of my white friends on Facebook actually been sharing this stuff like, hey, like, as a white person, we don't really have to say anything. We can just share the voices and the opinions of our Black and brown friends. And like, we don't, like, this isn't a time for us to like necessarily have the best takes. but to like just listen and go like, how can I help? And, you know, that kind of thing, and just step in and, you know, like use your body as the frontline defense, and, you know, or just, you know, even just sharing like articles that are written by people of color, about just, I mean, whatever, honestly.
I think that's the hard part. I think for white people, when they get a platform, they want to be able to use it. As I say, as I maybe speak over a thought of yours. P.S. Sorry about that. But I think
I'm triggered.
I know, right? Lucy, I'm so sorry. But I think that using our bodies and our voices to create platforms for other voices, and then shutting the fuck up. You know,
Yeah,
like,
show up and shut up.
You have to be able to create that space and then step the fuck back. I mean, it's essential. Yes. For change to happen, because that's part of that whiteness thing. I have the power and privilege to be able to step up and get somebody to listen to me. I will Karen my way through that shit, and I have done it before. Like, no, I will be heard, and I will show you what that looks like.
Yeah.
And then I have to be quiet.
It's hard. I try to think of that, like, when I want to speak, do I need to shut up? And like when I'm afraid to speak, or like maybe it's not my place, that's probably when I do need to speak up. But
yeah, like I can think of like I can improvise a scenario in which there is a person of color who is trying to get their voice heard against, let's say, a manager, and they're not being heard, and then the white Karen comes in and goes, "Hey, you come over here right now. All right, now listen to this." And then like this, then they go over there, and then, you know, then they give like basically what you're just saying, just give them the platform to go over there. Basically say, you're not listening to this person. I'm going to make you listen to this person.
Yeah, that's happened. I've done that several times with students where they you know, maybe don't know the right people to talk to, or the people they're talking to are dismissing what they're saying. And then I make a phone call or send an email, and the situation is different, right? Because I have created that space. I'm like, no, it needs to be fixed, and this is how we're going to do it. And they're like, oh, okay, well, let me see what we can do. I'm like, yeah, let us see what you can fucking do. Anyway, it's frustrating.
And it's hard, like this whole like empowerment is a word I sometimes have trouble with, because sometimes I think it's used to say, you don't have a voice till I give you one. You don't have power till I give it to you. Like,
yeah.
And I don't want to suggest that power relations are not messed up, but like, how can we empower without, again, it's the saviorism, I guess. But yeah, that's something I struggle with, is how can I like open those spaces without being like, come here, child, like I'll speak up for you and now push you through. Like, I don't know. I think it can be tricky.
That might be maybe stop using that word. I mean, even that's so simple. Maybe you can talk about creating space, because that's different. I feel like creating space, and don't use the word empower anymore.
Yeah.
Don't allow your students to use that word, because words have power, and if they're continually talking about how they're empowering other people to do something, well, maybe that's problematic.
Yeah. I think the intention is also a thing. I think like it's just asking more questions, honestly, I think is also part of it. It's just like ask.
Agreed.
If you're just not sure, just ask a question like, is this like okay? Like, what do you need? And, you know, try to like, you just try to, I think, like give, you try to use whatever power you have to just help create a space where a more, you know, like a better situation can happen. And you know, like, cause like, I think I've had to do that before, where there was like, I was mentoring somebody at a school, and they had a situation where, and they're a woman, and they weren't being heard in a situation. And I was like, I was in a position where I could make it so they were heard, but I was constantly asking, like, what do you want? What do you want me to do? Like, I want to help. How can I help? I don't want to be the man who comes in here and says, I will help you. But I don't want to just not do anything. So if you don't want me to do anything, then I won't do anything.
That's great. Oh, sorry.
And I just
and it's like,
just ask the question. Just ask. If you're not sure, just ask.
Because I hate it when men come in like, oh, I've had them ask me if they want like to come in and talk to my class if they're heckling. They weren't heckling, like, or this whole like, I'll help you out, like without. I mean, it's
Don't
kind of
worry,
a
my
form of
lady. I
mansplaining.
will assist.
Yeah, it's a physical mansplaining is what it is. Yeah,
so
I appreciate that.
How do we all create space in that physical representation that Luci was talking about white folks creating a barrier so that people of color could have that platform to protest safely? Like, how do we create that physical manifestation in all the things that we do? Let's solve that riddle, and then we'll have solved the problem altogether.
I think maybe one way is if
Take five.
if white people can attend these protests and help pass out cocktails. I think that
That would solve all.
It's actually it's like the radical change thing is a thing that I feel like it's a weird thing to see all of these protests happening, because it honestly just feels good to me. It feels amazing to see. I don't like that people are being hurt, but they're being hurt by the police, and there's just too much pain, and there's been too much suffering in our country for such a long time on all different levels, that I feel like this is sort of, like, and almost specifically because of the way Trump is reacting. Like, he embodies a section of this country, and the way he reacts is very nonchalant. He doesn't get it. He thinks the protesters are thugs because they're looting or whatever, and he's just like, he's congratulating the Secret Service for keeping him safe, and he's just like over there in his little bunker, and just like, and it's just like, I kind of feel like in this moment, and maybe this is not a safe thing to say, maybe we'll have to edit this part out, but I think helping to put gasoline on the fire at this moment is probably the best thing to not try to shut it down and not try to stand in the way. I don't know. Maybe that's too
metaphorically or literally. And I feel like in really interesting ways, Trump is doing that.
Yeah, like there's kind of like, it's like, it feels like when the president is like, when the looting starts, the shooting starts, and quoting, racist and threatening to use the military on American civilians, it's kind of like, well, the war has been declared. So
the war has been declared. Yeah.
So I'm not going to just let you have war on me.
Are you worried about the co-option of some of these protests by white nationalists, white supremacists, neo-Nazi organizations? Mm-hmm. Are you worried about that? Absolutely. Or do you think that it's sort of like, I don't want to call it like a righteous revolution, but do you feel like they won't be successful?
Who the white nationalists won't be successful?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, in co-option of some of these protest movements.
I am worried about it because they want to see more black and brown people suffer.
Yes.
And they train to do it. But I think that there actually is a lot less of them. And from what I saw, there were some people who showed up that were clearly like Boogaloo kids and fascists, and they got called out, and they, like, you can see who they are, but like the thing is there's like 3 of them, and they left. And I think that's sort of, I guess I'm kind of like thinking like, well, in war, there's opposition and that kind of thing. I really don't want like people to suffer, but I think that if it comes to it, I don't think that white nationalists will be successful, because I don't think there's more than them than there are of us.
Yeah. I do think one important note that like that I was just thinking there is, and this is Paulo Freire, like author, educator of Pedagogy of the Oppressed, that's most famous like work. But I do think that the oppressed never incite violence because it's always been first initialized by the oppressor, and that whatever is happening now is self-defense.
Yeah.
From a long line of slow violence, of systemic violence. In regards to like the white nationalists, like I definitely do think that they are active in trying to co-opt this. And I think for them, like from their perspective, their desires, their goals, accelerating this to the point where either the National Guard, the cops, like the state, or their own militias are able to cause even further suffering. That's their goal, right? They want a civil war.
And
They want
for it that they didn't start it.
Yeah, exactly. And for them, they'll be saying, "Oh, but it's self-defense because they're burning down our
Target."
bullshit."
But the other thing is,
they burned down my
as far as I
parties.
understand it, the specific, like the Boogaloo kids who want the Civil War, they're not necessarily pro-Trump as far as I know. Like they're just almost like just full chaos.
Like accelerationist all the way.
And that,
like,
yeah, and so like there was someone who was describing that like in a weird fucked up way. This is really great that this is happening now and to Trump directly under his presidency, because it's white people. It's like a white militia group that is not under his control that can really make things worse for him and his election or re-election. I don't know how true that is, or like how much of that to really stand by or believe in, but there's a part of it where it's like, I don't know, like kind of like my D&D alignment where it, like chaotic good kind of thing, where it's I don't know. I feel like they're gonna try and co-opt it, and they've already been trying to co-opt it. But I don't think that should stop anybody, because I think they're being called out. Like I don't think they're as slick as I think they are, and I when I see them, like when I saw them last night, like there's not that many of them, and they like you can't. There's way more people who are on our side who know what the struggle is about, that just will not let them succeed.
That's heartening. No, I know.
Yeah.
I hope that's true.
Because they got like they left, like they were like standing around. There was one guy who was drinking a beer who was like trying to talk about how all lives matter, and a beautiful thing happened when two white people told him to shut the fuck up and made him feel very ashamed, and you could just see his face redden, and he left. Like I'm just like, yeah, it's just like, I mean, because the problem is too is like, and I've experienced this as a younger person, when you think you know shit and then you almost violently realize you don't know anything, it's very embarrassing. And I think that's kind of like, that's sort of like what ends up happening is you're like, I'm gonna go in there and start a riot thing on behalf of white national. Oh shit, I didn't realize how wrong I was. I am not prepared for this. There's thousands of them. Oh my god. Like,
are we the baddies?
Are we the baddies?
I'm also curious too, like, is it like our side, like the protesters, is it our responsibility to like flesh out the I don't know where I was going with that.
To call them out?
I don't know, because I was thinking like,
should we all infiltrate 4chan?
Oh, that's a terrible place. Yeah, I don't know where I was going with that. You can edit that out.
Leave it in.
Will we ask the question one more time?
No, because
So, to what extent is it our responsibility to out counter protesters?
No, not like necessarily that, but like there's going to be people who are going to do things that will probably contribute to accelerating kind of the current situation. I guess I'm just thinking out loud here about like how do we, I think it's working within the communities and like having the community decide like what they think is appropriate for the protesting.
I struggle with that so much though, because I love hearing you talk about what communities can look like, Lazarus. Like it makes my heart happy that you think that in some dystopian future, like we're gonna be able to like have the space where like communities can make those decisions amongst themselves, and it'll be so lovely. Oh, yeah. And then I'm like,
it happens in Rojava.
I want to believe that.
I do, and then I'm like, except systems of oppression and police forces and government, and so I get stuck because
like how to get there.
That's what I said. So a radical revolution.
I kind of think what we're seeing is one potential way of getting there.
I feel like what we're seeing is hegemony, and this is a pressure valve, and there is a way that people think and go about their business, and every once in a while you have to release pressure, and then it goes back to the way that it was, and that happens over and over and over again. I don't want to be a negative Nancy.
I do. So I agree that to a certain extent it is absolutely a pressure valve. However, it's also an instance of possibility. It's an instance of like meaningful activist like potentiality.
Yeah.
And like maybe this is me going with like Sartre and just being like, yo, we have so much, there's freedom in the kind of this chaos of who knows what the hell's going to happen. Like we have to have some sort of like optimism, and like I get like this kind of cynical, like it's probably just a pressure valve, and then by Monday we'll all be cool. You know what I mean?
Did you just call me cynical?
The next time. No, pessimistic, cynical, yeah.
Multiple.
But we have, but I think that there's definitely a need for like that potentiality, because I mean, we're dedicated to social justice. We're dedicated to, combating and changing the world for the better against oppression and so forth. If you don't have that.
Oh, are you asking me to leave?
No. Oh my gosh. Get out. Get out.
If you cannot find ways to fix this, those are always my questions though. Like, how do we, I agree that there is momentum. How do we continue that without radical revolution, without an upending of our...
Why are you saying without?
Yeah.
Why are you saying without? Get out. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
Are you saying that because I'm a woman?
No, but...
And you don't want my opinion anymore?
There's like we take all the cops, we disarm them.
Okay.
And throw them in jail. We just keep them all.
What do we do about our education system?
We take all of the bad ones and we throw them in jail.
But then they're all in the injustice system. What do we do about the injustice system while they're all in it now?
What do we do about the electoral
Joseph
college?
Luci Stalin? Yeah.
Give us a play-by-play. We need a playbook, please. Yeah. Everything's online. What is
God
this?
Emperor Luci, please tell us the way forward.
We do mail it.
I'm not trying to be pessimistic. I want real things that I want there to be change so badly.
What did they do in the early days of communist Russia when they were like doing that takeover, and what did they like basically what America did during the Cold War when they were like grilling everybody on whether or not they believed in capitalism, or if they even
like McCarthyism. We want that. We want McCarthyism.
Exactly.
We want like an inverted McCarthyism.
I don't know about this.
Are you one of those rightists? One of those capitalists?
I'm not as educated as my colleagues here, but so I don't know all the terms and the names and all the time and dates, but like reverse
I don't know
that.
the dates either.
Reverse that over. So what do you believe in? Do you believe in all lives matter? Like just like a checkbox, like, oh, yeah, I think all lives matter. Even an inkling towards that sympathy, they go straight to jail.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, that's definitely
You basically that's like some like Stalin love shit right there.
I feel like if we didn't lose listeners with the Bible conversation earlier, now definitely like we've definitely turned a corner.
I think Luci went full tank. Yeah. Yeah, to kind of shift the conversation just a
Probably
little bit.
good idea.
Just
Let's
a
do
little.
that.
Not too far.
I do think it is important to say if you're able to go out and protest. There's also ways to protest and contribute to the movements in solidarity from home as well. There's also a lot of resources. There's the NLG, the National Lawyers Guild, is doing a mass legal defense fund. And for the Minneapolis chapter, the number that you can call to help support funding to help bail out protesters is area code 612-444-2654. There's also a National Lawyers Guild Mass Defense Program on their website, and they're currently working across the country to protect the rights of those protesting the police killing of George Floyd and the broader pattern of ongoing racialized police violence. The NLG chapters and members are on the ground in dozens of cities right now supporting the right to dissent, and so donating will help them provide legal support for political activists and movements for racial and economic justice. We'll link a couple of these, this and other resources in our episode notes here. Also, I saw this before we get into that article, Hunty, that the crisis text line on Friday, they had shared a graphic on Instagram with the caption, "We can't talk about mental health without addressing factors like systemic racism." And what they do is they provide a free 24/7 mental health support that is available by just texting HOME, HOME, to 741-741. So there's resources out there to not only help individual members of our community as well as the communities themselves. But definitely need to look into that. What can you talk a little bit more about that article that you had shared with us?
Yeah, well, I mean, there were a couple. There was I don't know if we talked about the Teen Vogue article about how to safely record police. We can talk about that second. The one I mentioned a second ago was a Medium article that had 75 things basically that people can do to promote anti-racism and equity or equality in some way, shape, or form. So a lot of it is, who you could email, text, or call in relation to injustice. So legislature, city council people, you can call your police department and ask them what their training looks like. If they say we don't have that, you can call your city council and say, I think this is really important. It's just really especially I really like the suggestions that they make that are ground level, that are, like community based, like we've talked about. How do you positively impact your community in ways that make it more equitable for all humans that live in those spaces? And so they offer some really great examples for how to do that at the local, national level, both. So.
Absolutely.
There's also the DSA, the Democratic Socialists of America, have been doing a lot of organizing. Yeah. They were actually down at the protest that I was at, and they were helping to distribute water and snacks and stuff to everybody. We actually had too much water and snacks that we were we were giving it to homeless people that we just kind of came across and stuff. And then there was just water packs just everywhere throughout the streets where people were walking and marching. So, but the DSA has been working really hard, as far as I can tell, with getting a lot of momentum on the local levels for getting vetting judges and vetting, all the different electoral types. I can't. Sometimes I'm just like, I feel like they just added layers to the system just to make it more confusing on purpose. But,
Yeah.
100%.
you know, like insurance, like it's basically insurance, the way insurance works. But there's that that I know of, and
I'll add in show notes. I'll add a bunch of because I got an email from the local DSA of just like places you can give if you can afford it to give money to. I think it was specifically Minnesota. There might be more local more local stuff relative to yourself. But at the very least, like there's I'll include some of the Minnesota specific ones.
yeah. I think if you're confused or like unsure, I think like if you just like Google local DSA chapter and tweet at them.
True.
Because I feel like then it's like they're very, very keen on making sure that everyone is supported that needs to be, and they also aren't filled with a bunch of tankies like me. So they're like, so you're not gonna get in trouble, I should say.
I think it's also important to, especially the official George Floyd Memorial Fund.
Yeah.
We'll link it in the notes, but it's gofundme.com/f/George Floyd. And through mass amounts of donors, it's 220.4 thousand donors. They've surpassed their $1.5 million goal, and they've already raised almost $5.5 million. So help that family out directly. And again, we'll link that in the notes as well. But I do think more than ever, now is the time to get involved in your local political organizations. Taking to the streets. Really, there's no peace, no justice, no peace.
Yeah.
Getting involved any way possible. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Hunty. I saw you were going to say something.
No, it's okay. I want to make sure that I create space for white men to have an opinion as well. So,
Shots fired.
Get out.
you probably have the power to tell me to do.
No, this is what they want. They want us to attack each other.
No, I was actually going to say something nice. I was going to say that, being with and among humans who believe the same as I do, because I know that I came off as a little bit negative, like, fuck, what do we do? I think that these grassroots movements are really important, but really people like you give me hope for what the future will look like and how we can sort of change our community. I was honest before when I said I wasn't teasing you, Lazarus, about me loving the beauty of your ideas about what a community could look like. I think that that's something to aspire to, white or not, regardless of how you self-identify. I'm just teasing. Maybe Mark can cut that part out. That was me being an asshole again.
Maybe he will.
See how he feels in the moment.
No, I really appreciate you people as humans and the work that you continue to do to try to affect change as much as possible and as best as possible and in ways that are really foundational and can grow, as opposed to, things that don't work or
Yeah.
So thank you.
And these
Positivity.
conversations are messy. Like, we don't all have the same opinions even within this group, but I think that's the kind of thing that brings me hope. Like, hope is a subversive force. I try to remember that. But like, rather than wasting our energy on like people who don't want to have these conversations, like it doesn't have to mean, perfect consensus within the people who are wanting to work towards these things. But like, I think resisting all the pressures that break solidarities, which like that's so much easier said than done, but they're out there. And I don't have an eloquent ending to that thought.
Yeah, talk to your crazy aunt or uncle.
I don't want to talk
Challenge
to them.
Challenge them, excommunicate them if nothing can be done.
Or maybe
It's
on
so
a
much-
one-to-one.
like even if it's like if you have a child, hold that child as a ransom bait. Be like, oh, do you want to see your
He has a
niece
new grandbaby
Yeah, do you want to see your new grandbaby? Well, guess
in
what?
Connecticut,
Stop being
but
racist.
I can get over there.
Stop being a racist.
Stop being
You'll never see this
You
child
have
again.
to-
You'll never see.
You
I
have
shouldn't say her
to.
name.
You have to commit when you visit that I will give you an hour lecture about why you were
thing is,
wrong
I
when you
don't ever
said X,
visit.
Y, Z, those are the terms of your visit.
You know, I was talking about really appreciating all of you as people. That doesn't mean I condone kidnapping in any way, shape, or form. I just wanted to, I want.
Now I feel conflicted because you're telling me different things, you people.
It's okay. You'll learn how to have an opinion eventually, woman.
I'll be a Karen someday.
We all hope to be Karens.
We can only hope.
Hot damn.
Maybe that baby.
You have not yet seen my final Karen form.
Yeah, it's in process.
I'm glad that we can laugh and be joyful together and see that there can be a better future. I'm still stuck. I gotta be honest. Like, it's really, really hard for me to like wake up in the morning and check the news and to not know what's gonna come next. And that's overwhelming oftentimes for me. So I have to hold on to my appreciation of you humans, and I have to think about ways to make our communities a better place. And I'm glad that we can laugh, and I also want to talk about how much I empathize with those people who don't feel like they can have that right now. It crushes my spirit in many ways to not be able to take that away from people who are scared and hurting. And I just don't, and I felt like I needed to say something, because if people listen and when people hear what we say, I hope that they know that our laughter isn't born of making light of any of this. I think that we struggle with it because we don't make light of it. But we have to laugh otherwise.
Yeah.
Well, exactly. It's like we're fighting for a future where we can be happy with each other. Like, we're not fighting because we want to be angry.
Yes. Yeah.
We don't like being angry. It's very exhausting.
I'd
rather just hang out and laugh.
And like you said, I think it's important that the people who do not feel like they can laugh right now, like, that is so valid. I think also I have a deflection mechanism for pain where I choose to make light of things. So that's my own personal thing that I think a lot of people can relate to. Yep.
I was total ball at funerals.
Yeah.
I'm just kidding.
I cry on like all the movies, like even the corniest thing, like, oh my God, did you see how he looked at her?
Right?
Finding Dory, I was a total mess. Total mess at Finding Dory. Then I go to a funeral and I'm like cracking a joke and I'm like, God, I know this isn't appropriate. I can't stop.
I used to laugh when my brother got hurt, like growing up. It wasn't funny and I wasn't amused, but it was like a physiological response where like I'd like maybe even be crying and be like, this is terrible, I'm so sorry, and like laughing. I don't know what that says about me, but yeah. Maybe we'll lose more followers now.
Not neutral good.
I love everything about that story. I wish that people could see you. I wish, Micah, that people could see you and hear you tell that story, because I feel like those two things, like imagine
there's some juxtaposition.
Imagine who's the sister in Frozen, like the really sweet, like so like imagine Anna like telling the story, like, oh my God, Elsa's so hurt.
You know.
Well, I think that was a pretty good note, a very wholesome note to end on.
Was it? Okay. Maybe before that.
It's a powerful note to end on. It's an acknowledging of all the things, like, we're all human and this is a human struggle.
Yeah.
Very
that
true.
was a good way to put that. As opposed to I laugh at pain, other people's pain. That's different. Mark can cut that part
so
off
our
too.
listeners,
I have some work.
So to our listeners, thank you for listening. For all the protesters out there, keep fighting the good fight. You really give us, you inspire us to keep fighting the good fight because of this direct action. There is no justice. There is no peace. So please look at the resources that we'll leave and we discussed prior in the show notes.
I posted on Twitter. We'll post it on Twitter too, right? On our Twitter account? Okay.
Yes, absolutely. Does anybody else have anything else that they want to say or conclude with?
we're all fighting for a better tomorrow. We're all doing that. No justice, no peace. Yeah, fight the good fight. And we will keep doing our best to bring to light and start conversations about things that we hope will change the world.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Cool. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you all next time. We've got some cool stuff coming up. We'll get around to that Michael Moore documentary and the RPG series. But stay safe. Look out for your fellow community. And
we're with you.
Peace.
Peace out.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.